This is my video on how good board clears are in every card game. Boards. You know them, you love them, and every game has them. Maybe you have Pokemon here, which only has 5 bench slots and 1 active slot. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has your 5 main monster zones and your spell and trap card zone. In Hearthstone, you have the 7 main minion zones that you can play your minions to. And Magic, you just have lands and creatures on the board that take up as much space as you can fit. They're all varied and they change a lot depending on which different card game you're playing, but one thing that all the card games share in common is they all have versions of board clears. They're called different things depending on the game you're playing. So in Magic, they're called Wrath effects after this card here, Wrath of God. And this is a board wipe that kills both your side of the board and your opponent's. If it's only killing one side of the board, they call it a Plague Wind, off of this card right here. In Yu-Gi-Oh! They're called Dark Hole effects or Hole effects that destroy all the monsters on the field. And for the more popular version, Raigeki, which is the Plague Wind effect in Yu-Gi-Oh's mind where it destroys all of your opponent's monsters. In Hearthstone, these are called Twisting Nether effects, which are effects that destroy all minions on the board. It doesn't really have a similar effect to Raigeki or Plague Wind. Reno Lone Ranger is a card that came out that has a somewhat similar effect to clearing your opponent's entire board, but there's no real card that completely kills all the enemy minions on the side of the board for a set amount of mana like in these other two games. And Pokemon, I said, has a board clear, but there's not really any board clears in Pokemon. You got Dusknoir, which does damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon on the bench, which is kind of board cleary, but we're going to get to why Pokemon doesn't have board clears in a little bit here. Let's start with Magic the Gathering here. So how strong are the board clears in Magic the Gathering, like Wrath of God, which I showed earlier? And the answer is they're pretty strong. They're pretty powerful effects. You got Sunfall from the most recent set, an example of a very strong board clear, exiling all creatures in play and giving you an incubate token equal to the number of creatures you removed. You got Blasphemous Act, a super popular commander card that does 13 damage to each creature, killing functionally all creatures. Not to mention it discounts itself based on each creature in play, making this Wrath better the more creatures you're going to kill with it. You also have Settle the Wreckage, a Wrath specifically focused on killing attacking creatures. Your opponent gets a land for each one, but being able to exile all creatures that attack you in one turn, super powerful effect. All of these effects you can see are focused a little bit on breaking symmetry, and this is typically how Magic powers up their wraths rather than changing the cost. You can see Wrath of God, Settle the Wreckage have the same cost. However, you break the symmetry a bit by exiling only attacking creatures. On Settle the Wreckage's case, Blasphemous Act discounts itself the better the wrath gets, and Sunfall gives you a creature token to kind of break the parity on what these wraths would normally just clear both sides of the board. Magic also has the 5 colors, which give you a large variety and flavor depending on the different wrath effects that you're going to get in each of the colors. So, for example, if you look at the different colors, like Blasphemous Act I showed earlier, a damaging version of a wrath, we got green here with Bane of Progress, which is a wrath that only destroys artifacts or enchantments and gives you a big creature in response to that. This way, you can have wraths that don't affect creatures and affect all the other non-creature permanents on the board, and you can still have it feel very green by giving you a big creature at the end of it. Cyclonic Rift, a very popular example from the Commander format as well, has an overload cost, which allows you to target every single non-land permanent on the board that you don't control and return it to your opponent's hand. You're not actually destroying them, which is a very anti-blue thing. You're returning to the hand, which is very popular with blue. Not to mention, this targets all the things on the board, so it costs a little bit more than a normal Wrath. However, it gets rid of absolutely everything, which is super powerful. Massacre Girl is an example of a black version of a Wrath. It gives all other creatures -1/-1, -1/-1 being a very black effect. However, if any creature dies this turn, it gives all the other creatures an additional -1/-1, stacking up the kills over time. Very, very black feeling effect. You also have white, which is the most popular Wrath color and the one that is most known for it. Farewell is a perfect example of that here because this card wraths basically whatever you could want. Artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and graveyards are all things that are somewhat difficult to or extremely difficult to fully exile without having access to white in your color pie. A huge variety of options for wraths is what makes Magic magic, if you ask me, and gives you many, many options when you're deciding how you want to put wraths into your deck, whether or not you are playing a standard format or a commander format. Board clears in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have a little bit of a different name than wraths in Magic. They're called Dark Hole effects, and they're effects that destroy all the monsters on the field. My question is, how good are these board clears in Yu-Gi-Oh? And the answer is that they're pretty broken, especially early on in the lifestyle of Yu-Gi-Oh! We had cards like Dark Hole, cards like Torrential Tribute, spell and trap versions like Heavy Storm that completely destroy everything on the field, and these cards were banned or limited to single copies for a very, very long time. An iconic example here, Chaos Emperor Dragon, completely destroys absolutely everything, including hands and boards, and does a massive amount of damage to your opponent. This card is a great example of a board wipe that got banned for being simply too strong to play in basically any deck for free. It's super duper strong early on. However, an interesting thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that they were starting out super broken. However, as the years have gone on throughout Yu-Gi-Oh!, they become more and more needed as power creep has taken over the game. As time has gone on, the board clearing effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Such as Dark Hole and Torrential Tribute have gotten more and more fair over time, and we've gotten additional versions of this that you can see displayed here. So for example, Black Rose Dragon is a synchro summonable monster from your extra deck that clears the entire board when it comes in if you want. An example of a card that you can use at basically any point during the game that clears the full board. Evil Storm Exciton Knight is a similar example for XYZs, where you can layer them on top of each other, and assuming you are losing, which presumably you will want to do if you're going to clear the whole board, you can detach a material from Exciton and destroy everything on the field. These more accessible versions of board clears basically guarantee that you will have access to them in the game if it is necessary to destroy your opponent's board. A good change if you ask me. Not to mention that we have cards specifically made for going second, like Lightning Storm and Nibiru, which are really good at clearing off your opponent's minions either on your turn after your opponent has played, or for example, Nibiru clears it off during their turn, the most powerful effect that you could possibly have, disrupting your opponent's entire board in the middle of their combo. Super powerful effects that are needed to make going second playable in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you didn't have ways to clear out your opponent's super stacked board going second, it would simply not be able to play if you lost the die roll. It became super duper normal to see wrath effects or board clearing effects for spell and traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! As the game has gone on. So even though they've been there and present since the very beginning of the game, the further into the future of the game you get, the more and more of these effects you're going to see. Now, Hearthstone has Twisting Nether as its version of a full board clear effect. And my question is, how good are the board clears in Hearthstone? They're great. They're not like amazing like they are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where they cost 0, and they're not super duper powerful like you see in playing every single format for Magic. However, cards like Brawl, cards like Plague of Death, these cards have seen a good amount of play over the course of Hearthstone's lifespan in the slower controlling decks that simply want to clear boards for not super cheap, but being able to clear everything kind of makes up for the large cost of cards like this. They are also available to many classes, for example, Brawl, Plague of Death, Twisting Nether. These are 3 different classes that all have access to these clear effects, and they typically have a very high cost or condition that you must fulfill for them to actually work. Plague of Death, pretty high cost. Twisting Nether, pretty high cost. Brawl leaves one minion behind, which could be very detrimental to you. Defile is my favorite example of clear in Hearthstone. Very similar to Massacre Row we saw earlier, it does 1 damage to all minions, and if any of them die, you get to cast it again. So because Defile costing so little means that if you set up Defile to clear the whole board, you get a 2 mana full clear, much cheaper than Twisting Nether for the normal cost of 8. However, you do need to set up Defile a bit beforehand, so that way every minion will die when your Defile goes off. Now, this started becoming a bit double function over the course of Hearthstone's lifespan. So the further into Hearthstone you get, just having a simple card that only clears the board became less and less acceptable. Most of the board clears in our current age of Hearthstone simply destroy a board and then build the board after the fact, giving you some benefit for casting a board clear. For example, we have the combo of Showdown and Prismatic Beam. Showdown gives you a board, and also Prismatic Beam destroys the board your enemy gets from the Showdown and whatever board they had in addition to that before you played Showdown, meaning that you can both clear the board and summon a board for yourself with just these 2 cards. Another example is Sunset Volley, which both deals damage to your enemy's face and also summons a board for you. 9 costs, however, means that this card is very expensive to play and normally wouldn't see tons of play. However, in Mage decks right now, Portalmancer Skyla is seeing a ton of play, which swaps the cost of low and high cost spells in your hand, meaning that you can play Sunset Volley for a very, very low cost, as low as even 0 if you swap it with a coin. Now, Reno Lone Ranger is an example of both building a board and also denying your opponent's board for multiple turns, because when you play down Reno, it not only removes the opponent's entire board, but only limits them to having 1 board space, basically denying them from being able to develop a board after the fact. So even though Reno now costs the full 10 mana, takes up your entire turn, and also has a huge stipulation that your deck can have no duplicates at the very beginning of the game when you put this card into your deck, Reno is still super duper strong even after going through multiple rounds of nerfs, because denying your opponent's board is the most powerful effect you could have in Hearthstone, and this is why board clears are so strong and are gaining so much power. The main focus of the game in Hearthstone is to get on board and deal damage to your opponent's face, unless we're playing in a very toxic metagame where the board matters very little. So this means that you need to handle board clears in Hearthstone with extreme care. If your board clear is too strong and kills everything guaranteed, if your board clear summons a massive board for you after the fact, or if your board clear simply stops your opponent from being able to play on the next turn, this is why Reno is definitely a design mistake and why these cards need to be treated with a lot of caution. Now, for talking about Pokemon board clears, in Pokemon, the board is kind of necessary for you to play the game at all in the first place, because if you take all of your opponent's Pokemon, you win the game no matter how many prize cards you have left remaining. This means that if you played any board clear from the previous games, you would instantly win in Pokemon. Now, this is why Pokemon limits you to only having one attack per turn, which basically means you can only take 1 to 3 prize cards per turn, depending on which Pokemon you end up knocking out. This way, you can't have a massive wipe of your opponent's board on one turn and stop them from being able to play anything. But how good is it to remove simply one Pokemon from your opponent's board? If we're not allowed to remove absolutely everything, how about a card like Dusknoir here that can simply put 13 damage counters on one Pokemon, functionally removing it from the board if it was a weaker Pokemon or if it was already damaged? It's extremely powerful. It's insane comparing board clears in normal card games to card removal in Pokemon, because it's super powerful and worth a very, very high cost. Dusknoir here has the super high cost of deleting itself from the game, knocking itself out. This gives your opponent a free prize card guaranteed when you use Dusknoir's effect. Not to mention that you don't guarantee get a prize card if you don't hit a Pokemon that has 13 or less health when you use Dusknoir's Curse Blast ability. However, it is still worth seeing play and sees plays in tons of decks because of how powerful Curse Blast is. The effects that are super weak, like Curse Blast, actually end up being super duper strong and metagame warping. If we look at a card here like Crobat-G, a card that saw a lot of play when I played the game, it simply puts 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. It doesn't have any cost associated besides playing Crobat. However, just 1 damage is still something that is monitored in Pokemon. If you're looking at a more modern effect, we have Wellspring Mask Ogerpon-EX. This card has the Torrential Pump ability, which forces you to shuffle your 3 energies attached to Ogerpon back into your deck. However, if you do this, it does an extra 120 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Dealing an extra 100 to the front Pokemon and 120 to the benched Pokemon means you can take multiple knockouts at the same time, and also lets you snipe specific Pokemon on the bench that you need to get rid of if they're core to your opponent's engine. Sniping Pokemon on the bench is a super powerful ability, and definitely part of the reason Dusknoir is so strong. However, another reason that Dusknoir is so strong is because it lets you take extra prize cards at the same time. So if you look at a card like Iron Hands, its Amp You Very Much attack is the only attack it has with any text, and it lets you take an extra prize card if that attack knocks out the enemy Pokemon. However, it is weaker than its Arm Press attack that costs less energy as well, meaning that this card has a huge cost to get that benefit of being able to take one more prize card on an attack. Not to mention, one of the most powerful cards of all time, Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia GX, has the Tag Team Attack Altered Creation GX, which has many effects, but the most prominent of which being that every time you would take a knockout of your opponent's Pokemon, you take an additional prize card. This attack can only be used once per game, and was metagame warping because of how powerful it is to be able to take additional prize cards during your turn. Taking more prize cards is how you usually will win the game, as most Pokemon decks are set up to have a full bench at the end of the first few turns of the game, meaning that you must take all 6 of your prize cards, and the faster you can take those, the stronger it is. Meaning that Dusknoir, even if it gives your opponent a super powerful prize card, both gives you an additional prize card and takes out an important Pokemon on the bench. Any way to pull ahead in Pokemon by either sniping your opponent's Pokemon on the bench and diluting their strategy that they need to win, or taking extra prize cards to speed up your strategy of winning, are made significantly weaker than normal because they are simply so strong. Cards like Iron Hands are clearly powered down because of the ability to take more prize cards. Crobat-G, an example of a Pokemon that puts damage, only puts 1 and still sees play. These effects need to be kept very weak for the balance of Pokemon to stay intact. In conclusion, board clears in card games serve many different functions and range based on what card game you actually end up playing. In Magic, cards like Sunflower are mostly used to delay your opponent and stop them from being able to kill you early or in the late game by clearing all the creatures. In games like Yu-Gi-Oh!, board clears are used for massive blowouts, stopping your opponent from being able to act, and by giving you a chance as the player going second to go in and destroy your opponent on your first turn of the game. We got cards like Reno Lone Ranger, which in Hearthstone, the basic ability is just to try to win the game by stopping your opponent from being able to actually play anything that can counteract your strategy on its own. And even in Pokemon, a game that doesn't allow board clears because of how powerful they would be in the game, cards like Dusknoir with Curse Blast are still super powerful for controlling your opponent and stopping them from being able to do their strategy. This is one thing that all these card games share in common, and the key thing to take away from what board clears do is that resource denial of your opponent is good no matter what game you're playing, and these massive resource denial effects are super duper good no matter where you are playing them. Magic, Hearthstone, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Clearing the board is something you always want to do. Thanks for watching my video. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I've had a harder time uploading more recently, but if you subscribe, it lets me know that I should make more content just like this one. Also, feel free to comment down below about board wipes in your favorite card game and tell me a little bit of a story about times that you've used board wipes in your favorite card games. Also, let me know in the comments if you want me to stream, because I've had it on the mind and thought I could stream some of the different card games that I use in the videos here. I would love to talk to you guys in the stream comments, so let me know. Thanks for watching.